Hello, today we're going to paint gorgeous sunflowers in vibrant watercolour, easy to follow step by step with me, Jude Scott. I've added subtitles to this, so I hope you'll join in and paint along. These lovely sunflowers that I'm using for my image were growing on the rooftop of the Changi Airport in Singapore last time we passed through. And gorgeous, gorgeous flowers. And they were quite unique because usually sunflowers all face the same direction, and that's a bit of a challenge with sunflowers to get them so that they look artistic and they're not all facing the same direction. So you have to do your drawing and use a bit of license there. I thought what I'd do to start with is show you a very loose way of how to paint these sunflowers. I've mixed up very, very strong Aureolin Yellow, which is a transparent yellow, a very cool yellow, and I'm splashing over that some very strong burnt sienna, and I'll also mix up another very warm yellow using Aureolin and a splash of, I think I'll put some red with that, and I'm just going to splash it on the paper, and this is to show you how the colours that I'm putting here will translate into making the painting. I've put down a green that I've made from Prussian blue, and then I've added Quinacridone Gold to that, and the blue is made from Cobalt and Mars Violet. And you can see how when those colours all run together on the paper with just being sprayed with a splash of water, they'll merge together and they form a fantastic background for you to be able to do negative painting back in to the flowers in the background and get the image that I'm going to do today. So here I've actually put a spray of water on the paper first, and I'm putting down Aureolin Yellow and burnt sienna, and I'm going to spray that again. So don't use a spray that has very fine drops. We don't want an even mist of water to be sprayed on the surface. If you have big uneven drops, and if you hold your paper up to the light, you'll be able to soon see where it's wet. And you want big uneven areas, because where it doesn't get wet, that will stay as white paper, and you can use that and paint back into it to add to the vibrancy of what we're going to do here today. So my dark green is Prussian blue and Quinacridone Gold. That makes, Indigo and Quinacridone Gold. It makes a stunning dark green. Make it really, really thick, and pick your paper up, let it run down the page. If the yellows run into the greens, don't worry, that's all part of the magic of watercolour. Just let it flow. Don't try and control it. I think the hardest thing is to be patient and not rush into things, and just let it go and see what evolves. This is just an exercise in painting flowers. They don't have to be formal. We certainly don't want botanical flowers here today. This is all very abstract. And I think painting like this can give you the confidence to try other flowers in the same format. It's fabulous fun. So just softening those edges with a big wide hake brush. The materials that I'm using, the brushes and the colours, are all available beneath the video under the materials list that I've written up for this video. So I've done an underdrawing here, and I've just very, very loosely put in the yellow, the 3 yellow flowers, and I'm letting it just dry off a little bit underneath there where the dark foliage will go, because it's in very dense shade. As you can see, if you look to the left where I have the image of, I've cropped the image of the original sunflowers to use the format that I want, and I've sort of picked out 3 flowers that I'm going to use and had to change them around a little bit to get the composition that I like. I'm putting some more very, very dark background in, because the paper is so wet with spraying and splashing water on. you need to mix up very strong paint. If you find that your paint is looking very pale at this stage, it's because your paint is not strong enough. And this paint is a really powerful dark green. I don't use pre-mixed greens in my palette. I mix all my own greens. So by the time that this dries, it will be much, much lighter. And all those wonderful runs down the paper, I think, just add to a lovely casual feel to these sunflowers. Now I've just sprayed a bit of water back into those as they have dried. That's into the foliage, and you can see that there's a little bit of dappling that has occurred in the texture there. One of the things that's really important if you're doing sunflowers or any bunch of yellow flowers, for instance daffodils, wattles, etc., you need to be able to use and mix warm and cool yellows. Now, some people go, warm yellow, all yellow's warm. No, it's not actually. So Aureolin Yellow is a very cool yellow, and it's a fantastic yellow to put into your palette because it's very transparent. It makes the most wonderful orange if you mix some Quinacridone Red or some rose madder to it. You get beautiful warm reds, and you also get lovely warm yellows just by adding a tiny amount of one of those two reds to it. And so then you've got warm and cool yellows. If you can't mix a warm and a cool yellow, you'll never be able to make your petals come forward and recede. And you can see how this test sample has dried, and you've got variations of tone and temperature within those petals and within the leaves. That's the look that I'm going for here today. So the centre of that sunflower is burnt sienna and quinacridone gold mixed up very, very strong, and the petals around it are quite wet, and as you can see it's just charged out into that damp area and it's forming the petals. I'm not going to make the petals too distinct because the more detail I put in at this stage, the more detail I will have to put in, and my aim here is to have a look that is quite abstract, but you can tell at a glance that it is sunflowers. So I've just realised, to my horror, that these two sunflowers and the one underneath form a face with a smiley mouth. So I'll have to change that as I go along because that's not what I intended. But at this stage of the painting, that's exactly what it looks like. So I'll have to change that, make sure it doesn't look like a face when it's finished. So I've just done some negative painting under those petals that are very, very light, and there's lots of white paper still there. And they're the petals from, if you look at the second on the right from the bottom, sunflower in that image, all you can really see in that is the petals at the edge. You're looking face on to them, and I just love that look. So I've just, I don't want the petals to look like the spokes on a bicycle wheel. So then, because the exterior petals are now dry, I'm putting another layer of a warmer, richer yellow over that, and all that mass of yellow in the background forms the backdrop to the flowers, which can work really successfully if you like painting in this format. So you can just look at photographic reference and see how there's light and dark, warm and cool in the yellows and the greens, and also we'll put some of that into the background as we go along. So this painting actually sold a couple of days after I finished it at an art fair that I was at on the weekend. And so the new owner of the painting, you'll be able to see how it was painted. The friend, or I think it was the mother who bought it for the daughter. I hope you enjoy watching to see how your painting was produced. So don't try and force a lot of this to happen. Just be a little bit patient and be kind to yourself. Have the confidence to make a couple of marks and then never ever blot off with a piece of paper if you're not happy, or try and get rid of it straight away with a brush. Leave it to dry. You can always change things much better when they're completely dry. If you start changing things when it's damp, you'll have a total disaster. You can add or subtract pigment or water when it's really wet, but once it starts to be half dry or almost dry, disaster time. And while your watercolour's wet, you can just keep adding more pigment. You can take pigment out. You can put totally different pigment in altogether. Like how I've got in the background, I've got on the right-hand side, I've got some Cobalt Blue, and I've dropped that in when the paper was wet, and I've put some rose madder in with that, so it's granulated beautifully and it's separated on the paper, and the finished painting you'll see it's quite granular, but it's all cohesive, it all works together because it was done wet in wet. I love painting wet in wet. It's just gives you the most wonderful textures, it gives you the most wonderful feel to your work. And if you like this way of painting, it won't happen overnight. You know, it's taken me a long time, probably close to 20 years to be able to paint like this. You might find wet in wet is your thing. You might be able to do it in 5 minutes. I couldn't. It took me a long time to work out how to do it to a level that I was happy with. So I guess what I'm saying is don't give up. Just keep going. You will get there. You will get there. So have the confidence and have the patience just to keep going. It's crucial with the petals, as I'm always telling my students, be really careful with those sharp edges. If you don't keep those edges soft in some places on those petals, they will come out looking like spokes on the wheel of a bicycle. And that won't be what you want at the end of the painting. It will look very stiff and rigid. You want those petals to look like they can move and maybe that they're quite flexible. So I'm at a stage now where I'm just re-evaluating and restating some darks. Maybe I can break that area up there into a bit of background. The colour I'm using at the moment is Cobalt Blue and Mars Violet. And although it looks very grey in the image, it's actually a purpley grey. It's the most beautiful purpley grey. And the paints that I'm using are Holbein watercolours. I really love their colours. I love the fact that they're very finely ground and they lift off amazingly well. So when a painting's dry, if you think, oh gosh, I want to soften that edge, or maybe that's a bit dark and I want to put a different colour there, you can lift off really, really well with Holbein. Even the staining paints in Holbein will lift off well. And a lot of paints that I've used in the past are very staining and you cannot get them. You can only shift them off the paper very, very slightly. But these work really well for me. So if you haven't tried them, give them a go. So when you get to the stage where you're finishing off the painting, I sort of sit back and have a look and then think, okay, what can I do to improve it? Sometimes you don't need to do anything. Other times it's a lot more work to make it look finished. But here I want to put some more dark behind these petals to balance it up with the other side. So again, I'm just doing some back painting, negative painting, and I'll come back in and keep some of those petals as sharp edges and some of them I'll really soften off. So when you go to soften an edge, don't have a paintbrush that's dripping with water. Have it just damp. I use an old car cleaning, it's a chamois block, like I think I've got it in my last video, the one on hydrangeas I show you, or maybe in the blue, all about painting colour charts. I've used it in that, and I keep that handy and always just wiping a bit of extra moisture out of my brush or drying off the colour, because if it's too wet it will dilute the pigment that goes onto your paper. So you're constantly adjusting the pigment and water ratio in watercolour. It's all about the right amount of pigment on the right paper with the right brush at the right time. So once you've mastered that, the rest is easy. So where I've put the pigment at the top of the painting, I'm not going to be in any rush to correct that or to try and control it. And I'll just leave it to sit on the paper, and I'll just soften that leading edge of the pigment and then come back into it after. Just trying now to change the angle of some of those petals. Sometimes you can do it better upside down. If ever you're drawing and you just can't get a drawing to work, turn your drawing and the reference material, well, that's if it's a photograph, upside down, and it'll be like when you were a kid and used to do those puzzles, spot the difference. It will stand out amazingly well, and you'll be able to see clearly what maybe the shape is not quite round and you can't work out how to make it round. This is one good way. Just turn your reference and your painting or drawing upside down. Another technique for knowing if your painting's finished or if it looks good enough, grab your camera or your phone and take a photo of it in black and white. And if you take a photo in black and white, it will show you your tonal values. If it doesn't look good in black and white, you haven't got enough tonal depth. You need about a third of your painting needs to be light and 2/3 dark, or reverse, 1/3 light and 2/3 dark. So never have it 50-50. So if you've got really good strong tonal values, and I'm not talking about putting blacks in. For instance, these leaves that I'm putting in, they're my darks. So about a third of this painting will be dark and 2/3 will be very light and bright. So I've got a lovely big cauliflower that's happened there on the left, just below that sunflower, and I'm going to leave it there because I love those big marks that sort of appear on your paper with those lovely crinkly jagged edges. That I think they're just gorgeous. So I'm leaving that there. I'll just reinforce that dark at the base. Maybe it's a stem of the sunflower going down and off the paper. Maybe not, but I'm really happy for that to be just that bit darker. And you can come around and just readjust your tones. Now, if you look back up to the top of the painting, where I put that purpley shadow in the background, see how the yellow has bled through and that has merged together to give the most beautiful granulation and the magic which only happens with watercolour. So I can just put a few more darks into there. we're just about finished. There we go. You can see the granulation. I've splattered some dark flecks into the centres of the flowers, and you can see how some of the petals are very soft edged and some of them are quite sharp. I think that is a lovely balance of hard and soft edges, warm and cool colours, and I really hope that you've enjoyed painting it with me today. Please leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you'd like to see some more videos